Alright, hit pause on the gladiator movies and the marble statues, because we're about to peel back the golden veneer of ancient Rome to reveal something darker, something stranger. We know about the aqueducts, the roads, the laws, but what about their obsession with creative cruelty? What kind of mind looks at a criminal and thinks, you know what this needs? A rooster and a sack? Tonight, we're walking the dimly lit corridors of Roman justice. We're talking punishments so bizarre, so theatrical. They used human suffering as public entertainment and psychological warfare. How far would Rome go to make a point? What's the worst thing they could do to you? And why did it often involve animals? If you're ready to see the side of history they don't teach in class, make sure you're subscribed. Every single week, we dive deep into the untold stories. And if you want this journey to continue, hit that like button right now. It lets me know you want more. Let's begin. But before we get to the public spectacles and the animal sacks, we need to start with a punishment wrapped in sacred silence. This is about the keepers of Rome's most important flame and the price of letting it go out. In ancient Rome, the Vestal Virgins weren't just priestesses. They were the spiritual infrastructure of the entire state. Chosen as young girls, they served the goddess Vesta for 30 years, tasked with one non-negotiable duty: keep the sacred hearthfire in her temple burning forever, and, crucially, remain pure. Their chastity was believed to be the divine lock on Rome's security and fortune. To break that vow wasn't a personal failing, it was an act of treason against the gods themselves. So what do you do when the criminal is both guilty and utterly sacred? You can't spill a Vestal's blood. That would offend the very gods you're trying to appease. So Roman justice, in all its twisted creativity, devised a loophole as grim as it was logical: a bloodless execution. The accused Vestal would be prepared, not for a block or a sword, but for a descent. She was led to a small, subterranean chamber dug near the city walls, a tiny cell, already waiting. Inside, they'd place a lit oil lamp, a loaf of bread, and a pitcher of water, a sickening parody of hospitality. Then, they'd lower her in, and then they'd seal it. Stone and earth would block out the last light, leaving her in a silent, airless tomb. No violence, technically. No bloodshed. Just a slow, dark, solitary end, buried alive, with the symbols of a life she was forbidden to continue. The message was colder than the dark. Rome would rather inter you alive than risk a divine tantrum. And here's the brutal twist in the logic. The man involved? His fate was different. Public. Painful. Often, he was whipped to death in the forum for all to see. For him, blood was no object. This stark contrast tells you everything. The Vestal punishment was about ritual purity, an eerie, quiet erasure. His was about street-level justice. It was a reminder that in Rome, the symbolism was often more important than the person, and the rules changed based on whose blood was in your veins. So remember that chilling, quiet darkness. Because next, Rome's cruelty gets loud, chaotic, and frankly, downright bizarre. But if the Vestal's punishment was a chilling, silent affair, Rome was more than capable of turning suffering into a deafening spectacle. And for the ultimate crime against the very foundation of society, they devised a punishment so bizarre it feels like a nightmare concocted in a fever dream. We're talking about parricide, the murder of one's father. In Rome, this wasn't just homicide, it was an attack on the cornerstone of the social order, the paterfamilias. And for that, a simple execution wouldn't suffice. Justice required a darker, more symbolic poetry. Enter poena culli, the penalty of the sack. Imagine the scene. After a guilty verdict, the condemned isn't dragged to a block. Instead, they're presented with a large, sturdy leather sack. Then, the real horrors arrive, not as tools, but as co-conspirators. First, a dog, snarling and confused. Then a monkey, chattering and frantic. A serpent, coiled and sensing danger. And finally, a rooster, squawking in protest. Each creature was a living, breathing symbol of what the criminal had violated. The dog for loyalty, the monkey for chaos, the snake for deceit. The condemned, hands-bound, would be forced into the sack with this terrified menagerie. The opening would be sewn shut. Now, picture the inside, a pitch-black, suffocating chaos of panic. The scratch of claws, the hiss of the snake, the primate's shrieks, the dog's barking, all muffled by thick leather, a blender of pure animal terror with a human being at its center. This wasn't just an execution. It was a deliberate, calculated descent into primal madness. Then came the final act. The heavy, writhing sack was carried to the banks of the Tiber River. With a heave, it was thrown into the deep, current-tugged water. The sack would sink or be swept away, the internal frenzy slowly succumbing to the cold water. Rome's message was grotesquely clear. You have obliterated the natural order of the family, so you will die in a chaos of nature, stripped of your humanity, your final moments shared only with beasts. It was psychological torture, elevated to a public art form. But for all its theatrical horror, this punishment was about the family. Next, we'll see how Rome turned its cold gaze on the individual who dared to defy the state itself, crafting a punishment that was chillingly intimate and personally ruinous. Yet, for all the monstrous spectacle of the sack or the arena, Rome held in reserve a punishment that was quieter, colder, and for the elite, perhaps more terrifying than any physical torment. Because what happens when your crime isn't against a father, but against the emperor himself? When you're a senator, a general, a noble who has overstepped, plotted, or simply become inconvenient, you wouldn't be fed to beasts. That was for the common crowd. For you, Rome offered a more elegant and sinister choice: forced suicide. Imagine the scene. A trusted servant arrives at your villa, not with soldiers, but with a single sealed scroll. The message inside isn't a court summons. It's a polite, deadly suggestion from the emperor's own hand. It acknowledges your service, your family's honor, and then outlines your disgrace. The subtext is chillingly clear. Take your own life by nightfall, with dignity, and your property will pass to your heirs. Your name may even be spared public shame. Refuse, and the state will intervene, with public torture, the confiscation of everything you own, and the ruin of your family line. It was a perverse transaction, a deal with death itself. Your final act of free will was to consent to your own eradication. This was psychological warfare at its most refined. The victim was often given the tools: a sharp dagger, a vial of poison. They might choose a warm bath and open their veins, surrounded by grieving friends, composing final philosophical words. The philosopher Seneca was given this grace by Nero. He cut his wrists, but the blood flowed too slowly. He took poison, but his body resisted. His death became a prolonged, agonizing performance of the very dignity he was ordered to display. The horror wasn't just in the dying, but in the compulsory theater of it all. You had to stage your own exit, proving your loyalty to Rome by becoming the architect of your end. It was the ultimate demonstration of power, making a person complicit in their own destruction to protect what little they had left. But this punishment required a certain status, a legacy to threaten. For those with no name to protect, Rome had punishments that branded their infamy directly onto the flesh for everyone to see. But for those without a noble name to protect, without a legacy that Rome cared to preserve, justice was neither private nor philosophical. It was raw, spectacular, and designed to be unforgettable. When the crime was arson, treason, or simply being on the wrong side of an emperor's whim, you might be introduced to one of Rome's most horrifying public spectacles: the tunica molesta, the annoying tunic. The name is a masterclass in Roman understatement, a chilling joke. This was no ordinary garment. It was a death sentence you were forced to wear. The process was a cruel, deliberate performance. The condemned would be stripped and then fitted with a simple, knee-length tunic. But this tunic had been soaked, perhaps for hours, in a sticky, flammable substance like pitch, tar, or resin. It would cling to the skin, a cold, heavy second layer that reeked of impending doom. There was no struggling free. You'd be led into an arena, a garden, or a public square, this human candle waiting for its match. Often, this was evening entertainment. Emperor Nero was infamous for using these living torches to illuminate his lavish garden parties. Imagine the scene, the chatter of elites, the scent of wine and roasted meats, and then the sudden, sharp order. A guard would step forward with a torch. The crowd would hold its breath. With a casual touch, the tunic would ignite. The flame wouldn't explode, it would crawl. It would lick up the pitch-soaked fabric, fusing it to the skin beneath. The victim wasn't just burned. They were consumed from the outside in, transformed into a shrieking, stumbling pillar of fire to light up the Roman night. The smell would hit the crowd, a mix of burning pine pitch and something else, something deeply human. This was the core of the punishment, total, screaming transformation. You were no longer a person. You were a lesson, a flickering warning to anyone else who might challenge the order of things. It was execution as atmosphere, agony as ambient lighting. But if this punishment was about erasing a person in a spectacular flash, Rome had one final, quieter method that sought to erase them from time itself. But if the tunic was a brutal, fiery erasure of the present, Rome reserved its most coldly calculated punishment for those it wished to delete from the past itself. This wasn't about inflicting pain on the body, but a targeted assassination of memory. For the ultimate disgrace, a failed usurper, a traitorous senator, an emperor who had fallen out of favor, the sentence was damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. Imagine achieving the pinnacle of Roman ambition, your face on coins, your statue in the forum, your name etched into the marble of history. Now imagine the state deciding to unwind all of it, systematically and with chilling efficiency. The process was a silent, bureaucratic horror. A decree would be issued. Then the sculptors and masons would go to work, but not to build, to unbuild. Your statues were toppled, the features of your face carefully chiseled away until only a smooth, anonymous blank remained. Your name was hammered out of every public inscription, leaving a ghostly, empty gap in the stone. The mint would melt down coins bearing your image. Official histories would be edited, scrolls rewritten to omit your deeds, or to reassign your victories to someone more loyal. In some cases, they even went into private homes, demanding family portraits be altered, your figure painted over as if you were never there. Your homes could be razed, the very land cursed. The goal was to create a collective amnesia, to make it as if you had never drawn breath, never held power, never existed at all. This was psychological warfare on a generational scale. In a civilization obsessed with legacy, with earning eternal glory and fama, this was the ultimate terror. Your life's work, your struggles, your lineage, all rendered null. Your descendants would struggle to prove you ever lived. To be forgotten was to suffer a second death, far more complete than the first. The eerie evidence survives today. Statues with carefully defaced faces, stone panels with names scraped away, leaving only the shadow of a person. That ghostly absence is more haunting than any skull, because it proves the punishment worked. It forces us to wonder, who were these non-people? And what did they do that was so terrible? Rome didn't just want them gone. It needed everyone to forget they were ever here. In the end, their most bizarre punishment asks us the most profound question. Is a painful death truly worse than being erased forever?